Welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be discussing the ego. Specifically, how did Carl Jung see the ego? We'll also be looking at some of the illusions that he believed the ego was subject to. But first, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It really helps us grow. And if you enjoy the content, then why not give us a like as well? Let's get started. In the last episode, we discussed in detail what Carl Jung meant by the word psyche. In this episode, we're going to look at his ideas surrounding the ego. For Jung, the ego was more than just the personality or the conscious mind. Instead, it was an organizing principle of the psyche, an agent that attempts to bring order to our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. According to Jung, the ego develops from the self-concept of the baby up until adulthood. So when we're born, we have no idea who we are. We don't even know what our name is. But as we interact with others and they respond to us, we start to form a sense of identity. This process is called individuation, and it is through this process that we develop our ego. When we are young, our egos are very flexible and adaptable. As we encounter new situations and experiences, we learn how to deal with them and incorporate them into our sense of identity. However, as we get older, our egos become more rigid. We develop fixed ideas about ourselves and how the world works, and we become less willing to change. Our egos can sometimes hold us back, preventing us from growing and developing. This is because our egos are based on our past experiences and knowledge. They don't always know how to deal with new situations. As we encounter new situations and experiences, we often have to choose whether to stick with what we know or to change. This is where the ego makes its greatest mistakes. When we allow our egos to control our lives, we become prisoners of our own minds. We are unable to break free from the patterns of behavior that have become so familiar to us. We are afraid to be different because it means leaving the familiar behind. The ego is often praised for its ability to help us adapt to the world around us. However, Jung believed that the ego had its limitations. In fact, he believed that the ego was subject to a number of illusions. One of the first illusions that Jung identified was the illusion of separateness. The ego often gives us the impression that we are separate from the world around us. But Jung believed that this was not really true. He believed that we are all connected to each other and to the universe as a whole. We may feel alone at times, but we are never truly separate. Another illusion of the ego is the belief that we are in control of our lives. While the ego does play a role in decision-making, Jung believed that it was not ultimately in control. Instead, he believed that our decisions are often influenced by unconscious factors. These could be things like our past experiences, our relationships with others, or even our genetic makeup. The ego may think that it is in control, but it is often just reacting to these unconscious influences. For Jung, the ego was like a little scientist. Just as a scientist observes and categorizes the world around him, the ego does the same thing. It collects data from our experiences and files it away in our memory. Based on this data, the ego forms beliefs about the world and ourselves. However, just as a scientist can only observe a small portion of the universe, the ego can only collect a limited amount of data. This means that the beliefs that the ego forms are often incomplete and sometimes even inaccurate. Despite this, the ego acts as if these beliefs are absolute truth. It refuses to consider that there may be other ways of seeing the world. This is what Jung meant when he said that the ego was subject to the illusion of meaning. The ego often creates meaning out of our experiences, but this meaning is often just a story that we tell ourselves. It is not necessarily true or accurate, but the ego treats it as such. This can lead us to misunderstand other people and situations. We may also misunderstand ourselves. Because we all have different egos, we all see the world in different ways. This is what Jung meant when he said that the ego creates a personal world. Each person's ego creates a world that is unique to them. This world is based on their beliefs, values, and experiences. Even if two people experience the same event, they will perceive it in different ways because their egos filter everything through their own beliefs. This is why it can be difficult to understand someone who has a different worldview than ours. We tend to judge them based on our own beliefs, even though they may be right and we may be wrong. For Jung, the ego is like a detective. Just as a detective gathers clues to solve a crime, the ego gathers information to form a picture of the world. However, like a detective, the ego can sometimes be biased. This can lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations. In addition, Jung believed that the ego was subject to the illusion of time. The ego often thinks in terms of past, present, and future, but Jung believed that these were just human constructs. There was no real objective time. Instead, there was just a continuous flow of events. The ego's belief in time can lead us to make poor decisions. For example, we may worry about the future or dwell in the past instead of living in the present moment. Finally, Jung believed that the ego was subject to the illusion of control. The ego often likes to believe that it is in control of everything, but this is not always the case. Sometimes events happen that are beyond our control. When these events occur, the ego can panic. It may try to take extreme measures to regain control, but this is often futile. Instead, Jung believed that we should accept these events and let the universe take its course. By doing so, we'll be able to find peace even in the midst of chaos. So those are some of the illusions that Carl Jung believed the ego was subject to. Jung believed that the ego was not perfect. It was important to be aware of its limitations. so that we could avoid making mistakes. However, Jung also believed that the ego was necessary for survival. It allowed us to function in the world and make our way through life. Therefore, we should not try to destroy our egos. Instead, we should strive to understand them better so that we could use them to our advantage. One way to do this is to become aware of our egotistical tendencies. We can ask ourselves questions like, why do I believe this? Where did this belief come from? Is this belief really true? By asking ourselves these questions, we can start to see the ego's limitations. We can also start to see the world in a new way. Another way to understand our egos better is to learn about other cultures. This can help us to see that there are other ways of thinking about the world and that our ego's way is not the only way. It can also help us to appreciate the diversity of human thought and experience. Finally, we can try to live in the present moment. The ego often worries about the future or dwells in the past, but living in the present moment can help us to focus on what is really important. It can also help us to appreciate the beauty of life and find joy in every day. Jung believed that understanding our egos was essential to living a fulfilling and meaningful life. By becoming aware of our egotistical tendencies, learning about other cultures and living in the present moment, we can start to understand our egos better and use them to our advantage. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos. Have a great day.